Hello everyone, welcome to Pachara Talks. And today we will try to work on AZ700, which is our network specialist. So, what are we going to cover under this as per the syllabus provided by the Microsoft? Microsoft Certified Azure Network Engineer Associate, and these are the topics that we are going to cover one by one. Hopefully we will be able to cover the entire series just like the other ones we have covered. We'll start with, as just like syllabus, one by one module by another. We'll start with design and implement core network infrastructure, and before that we will understand what exactly is virtual network, things that it provides, why we need it, those kind of stuff from the basic fundamental conceptual level. All right, and let's get started. So whenever we go to Azure, this is absolutely fundamental. We get one tenant, right? What we get? We get one tenant. And what is that? That is our Azure Active Directory tenant, Azure tenant. And what we have inside the tenant, we have subscription that we link with the tenant. Rather than inside, we link our subscription with the tenant. We need to understand this hierarchy from the architectural perspective. So this is our subscription, this is our tenant. And we create workloads on our subscription. So what workload are we going to create here? Well, it's virtual network. So that's our topic. So we create virtual network inside the subscription. Okay, this, let's suppose this is our virtual network. Now, what is that virtual network and why we create it? So this is your private space on the cloud, just like you have your uh, private space in your office. So this is on logical uh, basis, private space on cloud. And this is foundation for setting up secure and organized communication between the resources. Why secure? Because it is private. So it is foundation for secure and organized communication between the Azure resources. Now there's two things. First, which resources need the virtual network? Of course, it's IaaS resources like virtual machines. However, we can also use virtual network for the PaaS resources with the help of endpoints. What are the endpoints? Private endpoints. Or we also have service endpoints. We have already covered these in other videos, but don't worry, we'll go by the syllabus point to point all the topics. So this is the very first topic, Azure Virtual Network, introduction to Azure Virtual Network. So as of now, we have a tenant, we create subscription, or we link subscription with the tenant, and we create a virtual network in the subscription. What this virtual network does, it gives us the private space. This is foundation for setting up secure and organized communication between Azure resources. For example, IP need, VM need IP address. That IP address comes from the virtual network. And we talked about secure communication. So regarding communication, there is two things that we need to understand from architectural perspective, from design perspective, and how virtual network helps us. So what are those? The very first thing is, if we have, for example, let's try to draw it. We have this VM1 and we have this VM2. Okay, inside a same virtual network, VM1, and we have VM2 inside this virtual network, which is 001. They can talk to each other by default. Okay, if we are not doing anything, by default they can talk to each other inside the virtual networks, but it is private space, so they can talk to each other securely. Okay, stick with the fundamental conceptual. We'll go deep securing a lot of things in later stages. So this is the first thing regarding communication. The second thing is, We have also, because these are talking to each other inside a virtual network, that's a private space, but we also want to talk to the internet. Okay, so in that situation, your virtual machine can directly talk to the internet by default. uh, in Azure, when we create virtual machine, by default you can go and access the internet. There are changes coming, that's fine, we need to know. However, if you want it to be secure, there are multiple ways to do it. That comes later. So the first point is communication, second is talking to the internet. So sending and receiving data to this VM, this virtual network helps. Now let's suppose there is your on-premises environment and you want to talk to the on-premise environment. So this virtual network will help there as well. Okay, now how, we'll talk about it in this same video, but before that let's stick to the virtual network first. Okay, so the virtual network, we understood this is our private space, this is the foundation for secure communication, and these communication, three type of communication we talked about. Now how we create this virtual network? With the help of CIDR blocks address range, or address space you can call it, and this is RFC 1918. RFC 1918, A, B, and C. Okay, for the IP address, what are those? 10.0.0.0 to slash 16, 172.16.0.0 to slash 12, and 192.168.0.0 slash 24. So those are the private ranges. Okay, so let's take a simple example of 10.0.0.0 till 10.255.255.255, which is actually 10.0/8. 8 means this remains the constant and these will go up to 255, 255, 255. Do not think this is a lecture on CNN and CCNA. This is just to understand the virtual network. So we create virtual network with the help of CIDR block, and we have to consider three ranges A, B, and C that we have in RFC 18. Okay, now let's go further. This is absolutely beginners class for Easy 700. So let's go further. Now we know how to create virtual network, but that's not enough. We also need to create the subnets. Okay, let's suppose these are the subnets that we have created inside the virtual network. What are subnets that we create inside the virtual network? These are smaller section of the virtual network. We'll give the address space to these subnets from the CIDR range that we have selected for this block. For example, let's suppose we have created 10.0. Okay, let's use the same example. 10.0.0.8. This is the CIDR block that we have used. We can give one IP range to this subnet, subnet 1, and we can give one IP range to subnet 2 from this entire address space in a logical way. For example, this subnet 1 is for your databases. This subnet is for your maybe web servers, anything that make more sense to your design. All right, so we got virtual network we created through CIDR block, and we got subnets through the same address space that we have for the virtual network. Now there are a couple of things we need to keep in mind. For example, when we create a subnet, there is always 5 address spaces, 5 IP addresses are blocked, or reserved rather, reserved, and that means you cannot use it. So who can use it? Azure. The very first IP .0, because the first IP if you assign to VM1 from any virtual network is .4. x.y.z.4, like 10.0.0.4 would be the first IP address. So dot 0 is taken by Azure for as a network address. Dot 1 and dot 2. 1 is taken as a default gateway, 2 and 3 as DNS, and the last is dot 255, which is broadcast IP address. So these 5 address in each subnets would be utilized by the Azure. So you would have -5 IP addresses in any subnets for usage. Okay, well done. So we know CIDR range, block, subnet, VNet. Now there are things that we need to keep in mind from subnet perspective. Let's see what are those. So the very first thing is, let's put it here. The very first thing is, when we create IP addresses for or CIDR block for virtual network, we need to keep in mind all of the virtual network that we have in our entire environment. Maybe we have on-premises IP ranges. So why exactly we are thinking about that? Because we don't want to overlap. It will create issue for us if we need to connect them. The second is, the idea of using subnet is to isolate. We can use different subnets for different purpose, like one for web server, one for databases, one for applications, one for management, things like that. So we need to understand the subnet isolation also for the security purpose. Then traffic management. Subnets can filter or route traffic using firewalls or NSGs. Okay, so we can apply NSG on the subnet. We can apply UDRs on the subnet so that all the traffic will go through the firewall. So we can have traffic management with the help of subnets. That will help us to do it. And we have different services in Azure. They use their own subnets, right? Like firewall or gateway, right? etc. So we have to think from that perspective as well. This is for the subnet only. Now let's see what are the capabilities of virtual network. Subnet consideration. Okay, now the very first thing is communication with the internet. Now the very first thing, this is outbound. The first example I gave where VM is talking to the internet was the outbound. What if somebody is sitting here, okay, and this guy wants to talk to our virtual machine? Can this guy reach to the virtual machine? No, because this is our private space. But if we apply public IP on this virtual machine, this guy can reach, of course, if traffic is allowed. Or we can have, to safer side, we can have load balancer and public IP on the load balance and traffic forwarded to the VM. That's how it can reach to the virtual machine. So this is your private space, but you can have a different methodologies, secure methodologies by which you can allow communication to your virtual machine from outside. And let's suppose two things: on-prem, one more Azure. Okay. Now, if on-prem wants to talk to this VM, we can create site to site VPN. Okay. And we have another option called express route, which is like your dedicated pipeline. If Azure wants to talk to this virtual network, then we have we call peering, something called peering. We can also have VNet to VNet connectivity as well. VNet to VNet connection, just like site to site VPN, VNet to VNet. However, peering is the most optimized option. If this guy sitting somewhere wants to talk securely to this virtual machine right here, then we can use something called point to site VPN. Point to site VPN. So there are different means of connecting your private space, your private virtual network from outside, from on Azure, on premises, things like that. Okay. If these are PaaS services, we have something called service endpoint and private endpoint. All right, so what else? Now, for traffic filtering, we already know there is firewall, there is NSGs, there is NVAs that we can use. Okay, and to route our traffic, we have something called user defined routes, by which we can say like all the traffic from subnet 1 will go to the VM1 first, and then it will go wherever VM1 allows. Let's suppose this VM1 is your NVA. So if this whatever traffic coming in or out of subnet will reach to the this VM, which is the firewall, and as per the rules apply, the logic will be applied. For example, there's a VM on subnet 1 wants to talk to, let's suppose, some social website. It will go to this firewall VM and it will decide whether to go or deny. And how the subnet will know here to go? We have to apply the UDRs. Okay, and it also support VGP, which is advanced routing options. Okay. So I think this is good enough to understand the virtual network at the beginning. So if you need to summarize, virtual network is your private space on Azure, private network on Azure. It allows secure communication within Azure to the internet or with on-premises network. It enables advanced features like filtering and routing traffic, network traffic. With Azure VNet, you get the flexibility, security, and control needed to build scalable and connected cloud solutions. With that, let's close this video. Thank you for watching. You guys have